The shot rang out across the barren landscape, echoing off the distant mesas as Virgil Hawthorne watched the last of his cattle collapse in the dust. It was 1877, and the drought that had plagued southwestern Colorado for 2 merciless years had finally claimed everything he had built over the past decade. Standing beside the emaciated carcass, his weathered hands gripped the brim of his worn Stetson, knuckles white with a fury that had nowhere left to go. The cattle had been the last of it. Before the drought came his wife, Sarah, taken by fever 3 winters past. Before Sarah, his young son James, thrown from a horse at just 9 years old. Before that, the ranch house his father had helped him build, consumed by fire during a lightning storm. Now, with his final steer dead at his feet and the bank closing in, Virgil Hawthorne stood utterly alone in the world at 35 years of age with nothing but the clothes on his back, his father's old Henry rifle, and a horse too loyal to abandon him. "Figured I'd find you out here," came a voice behind him. Marshal Pete Donnelly rode up, his face grim beneath his handlebar mustache. "Bank's making their move tomorrow, Virgil. Nothing I can do to stop it." Virgil didn't turn. "Ain't asking you to, Pete. Where will you go?" The question hung in the air as Virgil finally turned to face his old friend. His once handsome face was now weathered by sun and hardship, his dark hair streaked with premature gray, eyes that had once danced with hope now hollow pools of resignation. "Reckon I'll ride north." "Heard tell there's work in Silvercliff for a man who don't mind getting his hands dirty." Pete nodded solemnly. "Mining town, growing fast from what I hear. Silver's bringing folks in from all over." "Don't much care what brings 'em," Virgil said, mounting his chestnut gelding Ember. "Long as they pay honest for honest work." With a final look at the land that had been his home, the rolling hills now brown and barren, the dried-up creek bed, the empty corral, and the weathered cabin that would soon belong to the Durango Bank, Virgil tipped his hat to the marshal and nudged Ember northward. "You're a good man, Virgil Hawthorne," Pete called after him. "This ain't the end of your story." Virgil didn't respond. As far as he was concerned, his story had ended the day they put Sarah in the ground. Everything since had just been an epilogue of misery. The journey to Silvercliff took 4 days. Virgil traveled light, stopping only when Ember needed rest. He slept under the stars, his saddle for a pillow, the endless Colorado sky his only companion. On the evening of the 4th day, he crested a ridge and saw Silvercliff sprawled in the valley below, a chaotic cluster of buildings pressed against the base of towering mountains. Even from this distance, he could see the silhouettes of headframes dotting the hillsides, marking the silver mines that gave the town its purpose. Virgil guided Ember down the slope as the last light of day painted the mountains gold. The main street of Silvercliff was alive with activity, despite the approaching night, miners fresh from their shifts crowding into saloons, merchants closing up shops, ladies of questionable repute calling from balconies, and the constant din of piano music competing with drunken laughter and occasional bursts of violence. He tethered Ember outside the Broken Pick Saloon and stepped through the batwing doors. The room was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. Men crowded around poker tables and the long bar that ran the length of one wall. In the corner, a man with dirty fingers pounded out a tune on an out-of-tune piano. Virgil made his way to the bar and ordered whiskey. The barkeep, a barrel-chested man with a scar running from his left eye to his chin, slid a glass across to him. "New face," the man observed. "Passing through or looking to stay?" "Looking for work," Virgil replied, downing the whiskey in one burn. The barkeep refilled his glass without being asked. "Mining companies always hiring, though a man with your look might find other opportunities." "My look?" "You got the look of a man who's handled trouble before." "Lawman?" Virgil shook his head. "Rancher, or was?" "Well, whatever you were, it's written all over you that you know how to use that iron on your hip. Town's growing too fast for Sheriff Miller to handle alone." "Heard he's looking for deputies." Virgil considered this as he sipped his second whiskey. He'd never been a lawman, but he knew how to shoot straight and read men's intentions. And if it meant not having to go down into the darkness of the mines, perhaps it was worth considering. "Sheriff's office still open this time of evening?" he asked. The barkeep pointed down the street. "2 doors down from the assayer's office. Can't miss it." Virgil finished his drink, laid a coin on the bar, and headed back out into the twilight. The sheriff's office was a small, sturdy building with barred windows and a painted wooden sign hanging above the door. Through the window, Virgil could see a thin man with a gray mustache sitting behind a desk, poring over papers. He knocked and entered. Sheriff Miller looked up, spectacles perched on his nose, and appraised Virgil with a practiced eye. "Help you?" the sheriff asked. "Heard you might be looking for deputies," Virgil said. Miller leaned back in his chair. "Might be you have experience in law enforcement." "No, sir. Was a rancher until recently." "What brings you to Silvercliff then?" Virgil met the sheriff's gaze. "Drought took my cattle, bank took my land, nothing left for me down south." Miller nodded thoughtfully. "Straight shooter, I appreciate that." He stood and extended his hand. "Tom Miller." "Virgil Hawthorne." They shook, and Miller gestured to a chair. As Virgil sat, the sheriff poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot on the stove. "Silvercliff ain't like other mining towns," Miller explained, handing Virgil a cup. "We got families here, decent folks trying to build something. But we also got the usual trouble that follows silver claim jumpers, card cheats, men who drink their pay and then get to fighting. Could use another steady hand to keep the peace." "I'm no gunslinger," Virgil admitted. "Don't want a gunslinger. Want a man who'll try talking first, shooting last." "You look like you might fit that bill." Miller sipped his coffee. "Pays $40 a month plus room at the boarding house. You start by making rounds, breaking up fights, escorting the rowdies to the cells to sleep it off. Prove yourself and we'll see about more responsibility." It wasn't ranching, but it was a chance to start over. Virgil nodded. "When do I start?" "Got a badge right here," Miller said, opening a drawer and pulling out a tarnished star. "You can start tonight. First order of business is finding a place to stable that horse of yours and getting your gear to Mrs. Landon's boarding house." "Mrs. Landon," Hannah Landon. "Widow, runs the nicest boarding house in town. Strict rules, good food, clean sheets. Tell her I sent you." Within an hour, Virgil had stabled Ember at the town livery, collected his meager belongings, and found himself standing on the porch of a well-kept 2-story house at the quieter end of town. A brass plaque beside the door read, "Landon Boarding House ESD, 1872. He knocked, and moments later the door opened to reveal a woman in her early 30s with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes the color of summer sage. She wore a simple blue dress with an apron, and her expression was one of cautious welcome. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Virgil removed his hat. "Mrs. Landon, Sheriff Miller said you might have a room available. I've just taken on as his deputy." Her eyes flicked to the badge newly pinned to his vest, then back to his face. "Another deputy. Well, the Lord knows this town could use more law." She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in, Mr. Hawthorne, Virgil Hawthorne." "Mr. Hawthorne, I'm Hannah Landon." Virgil stepped into a tidy foyer with polished wooden floors and walls adorned with simple but elegant framed embroidery. The scent of fresh bread lingered in the air. "I have one room available on the 2nd floor, back corner," Hannah said, leading him toward a staircase. "It's small but comfortable. Breakfast is served at 6, supper at 7, no liquor on the premises, no women in your room, and no firearms at the table. Rent is $10 a month, due on the 1st. Sheriff arranges payment directly with me for his deputies." As they climbed the stairs, Virgil noted the careful attention to detail throughout the house: the clean windows with crisp curtains, the polished banister, the absence of dust on any surface. "You run this place alone, Mrs. Landon?" he asked. A brief shadow crossed her face. "Since my husband passed 3 years ago, yes. I have a girl who helps with laundry and cleaning twice a week." They reached the top of the stairs, and Hannah led him down a hallway to the last door on the right. She unlocked it with a key from the ring at her waist and opened the door to reveal a modest but immaculately kept room. A single bed with a quilt, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, a small writing desk with a chair, and a narrow wardrobe comprised the furnishings. "It's not much," she said, "but it's clean and quiet. Most of my boarders are businessmen or skilled workers, not miners, so you'll find it peaceful enough to rest between shifts. It's more than sufficient, Mrs. Landon, thank you. She handed him the key. Supper's nearly ready if you'd care to join us. Otherwise, I'll see you at breakfast. Virgil hesitated, suddenly aware of how long it had been since he'd had a proper meal at a proper table. I'd be obliged to join if it's no trouble. A small smile softened her features. No trouble at all, Mr. Hawthorne. Just wash up and come down when you're ready. After she left, Virgil set his saddlebags on the bed and his rifle against the wall. He poured water from the pitcher into the basin and scrubbed the trail dust from his face and hands, studying his reflection in the small mirror hanging above. The man who stared back at him looked older than his years, the weight of his losses etched into every line around his eyes and mouth. "You're still breathing," he murmured to himself, an old reminder from his father. "Long as you're breathing, you got a chance to make something better." Downstairs, he found the dining room where 6 other boarders, all men of varying ages dressed in the attire of shopkeepers and clerks, were already seated at a long table. Hannah was placing a tureen of stew at the center, alongside plates of biscuits and a bowl of stewed apples. "Gentlemen, this is Mr. Hawthorne, our newest boarder and Sheriff Miller's new deputy," she announced. "Mr. Hawthorne, allow me to introduce Mr. Finch, our town banker, Mr. Abernathy, who runs the mercantile, Mr. Cooper, our schoolteacher, doctor. Walsh, Mr. Sullivan, who works at the assayer's office, and Mr. Potter, our telegraph operator." The men nodded and murmured greetings. Virgil took the empty seat Hannah indicated and found himself directly across from her place at the head of the table. Once seated, Hannah folded her hands. "Mr. Cooper, would you say grace this evening?" The schoolteacher, a young man with wire-rimmed spectacles, bowed his head and delivered a brief but sincere blessing for the meal and those gathered to share it. When he finished, the men began passing dishes with the comfortable familiarity of a routine long established. Conversation flowed easily around Virgil, who spoke little but observed much. The banker and the assayer discussed the latest silver prices. The doctor and schoolteacher debated the merits of a newly published novel, and the telegraph operator regaled them with news from Denver. Throughout the meal, Virgil found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Hannah, who managed the dinner with quiet efficiency, ensuring everyone's cup remained filled and gently guiding the conversation away from topics too contentious or inappropriate for the table. "So, Deputy Hawthorne," Mr. Finch addressed him as the meal wound down, "what brings a man like yourself to Silvercliff?" All eyes turned to Virgil, including Hannah's, which seemed to hold a particular interest despite her composed expression. "Change of fortune," Virgil replied simply. "Looking to start fresh, aren't we all?" Dr. Walsh said with a knowing smile. "Each of us came here for a new beginning of some sort, didn't we?" Murmurs of agreement circled the table. "Even our esteemed hostess," Abernathy added, nodding toward Hannah. "Came here with her husband to open this establishment after losing their home in the Chicago fire, as I recall." A flicker of something pain, perhaps, or just resignation crossed Hannah's face before she composed herself. "Indeed, Mr. Abernathy. Jacob and I arrived in '72 just as the silver boom was beginning, and has made this the finest boarding house in 3 counties since," Cooper added gallantly. Hannah smiled politely. "You're too kind. Now, who would care for coffee?" As the evening progressed, and the boarders gradually excused themselves to retire or attend to evening business, Virgil found himself alone with Hannah as she cleared the last of the dishes. "Allow me to help," he offered, gathering plates. "That's not necessary, Mr. Hawthorne. My boarders don't pay to wash dishes. I insist. My mother would turn in her grave if I sat idle while a lady cleared my plate." A genuine smile touched her lips then. "Very well, the kitchen is through here." In the kitchen, a cozy room with a large cast iron stove and open shelving filled with neatly arranged crockery, Virgil helped Hannah wash and dry the dishes. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before she spoke. "What kind of change in fortune brings a man to take a deputy's position in a mining town, if you don't mind my asking?" Virgil considered deflecting, but found himself unwilling to be anything but honest with this straightforward woman. Lost my ranch near Durango. Drought took 2 years' worth of cattle. Before that, lost my wife and son. Didn't have much reason to stay. Hannah's hands stilled in the dishwater. I'm sorry for your losses, Mr. Hawthorne, as I am for yours, Mrs. Landon. Their eyes met briefly, a moment of mutual recognition passing between two people acquainted with grief. Life continues whether we wish it to or not, she said quietly, returning to her task. We either continue with it or get left behind. That's the truth of it, Virgil agreed. Though some days continuing is harder than others, indeed. She handed him a plate to dry. Was she ill long, your wife? 3 weeks. Fever took her fast. My boy was years before. Accident, Hannah nodded. Jacob took ill after a mine inspection. The doctor called it miner's consumption. 6 months from diagnosis to burial. They finished the dishes in silence, each lost in memories. I should report to the sheriff, Virgil said finally, hanging the dish towel. Thank you for the meal, Mrs. Landon. Best I've had in longer than I can remember. You're welcome, Mr. Hawthorne. Breakfast is at 6 sharp. With a nod, Virgil collected his hat and headed out into the night, the weight of the badge on his chest still unfamiliar. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of routine as Virgil settled into his new life. Days were spent patrolling the growing town, breaking up minor disputes, escorting drunks to jail, and occasionally riding out to investigate reports of claim jumping or cattle rustling. Nights often found him making rounds of the saloons and gambling houses, ensuring the rough entertainment of the miners didn't spill over into real violence. Sheriff Miller proved to be a fair boss, teaching Virgil the particulars of law enforcement with patience. The townsfolk gradually came to recognize him, tipping their hats or nodding in acknowledgement as he passed. It wasn't the life he'd chosen, but it was a life nonetheless. Throughout it all, the Landon boarding house became his anchor. Hannah's steady presence, her quiet strength, and the order she maintained in her domain provided a stability Virgil hadn't realized he'd been missing. Each morning at breakfast and each evening at supper, he found himself looking forward to the brief conversations they shared, the small insights into her character he collected like treasures. He learned that she had come from a prosperous family in Chicago, that she had married Jacob Landon against her parents' wishes because he was merely a carpenter without social standing. How they had lost everything in the Great Fire and decided to seek their fortune in the booming West rather than rebuild among the ashes of their old life. How they had arrived in Silvercliff with little more than hope and Hannah's dowry silverware, which she had kept wrapped in a quilt during their journey. In turn, Virgil found himself sharing parts of his own story he hadn't spoken of in years: his father's determination to build a cattle empire, his mother's gentle influence on their rough frontier existence, meeting Sarah at a harvest dance and knowing immediately she was the one, the joy of James's birth, the dreams they'd had for their son and their ranch. One evening in late October, Virgil returned to the boarding house later than usual after helping Miller escort a particularly rowdy group of miners to the jail. The house was quiet, the other boarders presumably retired for the night. But as he hung his hat on the rack in the foyer, he noticed a light still burning in the parlor. Hannah sat in a rocking chair by the fire, reading by lamplight. She looked up as he paused in the doorway. Mr. Hawthorne, I was beginning to worry. The simple admission caught him off guard. Trouble at the Silver Strike Saloon, nothing serious, just loud. She marked her place in the book and set it aside. You must be hungry. I kept a plate warm for you in the kitchen. You didn't have to do that, Mrs. Landon, Hannah, she said suddenly. After 6 weeks of sharing my table, I think you might call me Hannah when the others aren't present. A warmth spread through Virgil's chest that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. Only if you'll call me Virgil. Very well, Virgil. Your supper is still waiting. In the kitchen, Hannah insisted on sitting with him while he ate the stew she'd kept warming on the back of the stove. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows with the promise of the first winter storm. The passes will close soon, Hannah observed. Town gets quieter in winter with fewer newcomers arriving, though the mines still operate, of course. "This will be your first winter as sheriff's deputy," she continued. "The cold brings its own kind of trouble. Men drink more to stay warm, get restless being cooped up." "Sheriff Miller mentioned as much," Virgil replied, savoring the rich stew. "Said we might need to organize a relief effort if the snows are heavy." Hannah nodded. "Last winter we had 3 feet in a single night. The miners from the higher camps couldn't get down for nearly a week. When they did, they nearly drank the town dry." Virgil smiled at the image. "Can't say I blame them. Working underground all day, then trapped by snow, makes a man appreciate simple pleasures all the more." "And what simple pleasures do you appreciate, Virgil Hawthorne?" Hannah asked, her question seemingly light but her eyes searching his face with genuine curiosity. He considered the question seriously. "A good horse beneath me, open sky above, honest work that lets me sleep at night." He met her gaze. "A warm meal prepared by kind hands. Conversation that doesn't need to be filled with empty words." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "You've a poet's soul hiding behind that deputy's badge." "Not at all. Just a man who's learned what matters." The wind howled outside, and Hannah rose to stoke the fire in the kitchen stove. As she bent to add another log, Virgil noticed for the first time a small locket hanging from a chain around her neck, partially visible above her collar. "That's a fine piece," he remarked. Hannah's hand went to the locket. "Jacob gave it to me on our first anniversary. It contains a lock of his hair and a tiny portrait he commissioned in Denver." Her voice softened with memory. "He saved for months to have it made. He must have been a good man." He was, hardworking, honest, devoted. She closed the stove door and turned back to Virgil. "As I imagine you were to your Sarah." "I tried to be," Virgil admitted. "Though looking back, I fear I spent too many hours with the cattle and not enough with her and James, always thinking there'd be time later to sit and talk, to watch my boy grow." His throat tightened. Then suddenly, there wasn't any more time. Hannah returned to her seat across from him. After a moment's hesitation, she reached across the table and placed her hand lightly over his. "We all have regrets, Virgil. The trick is not letting them consume what life we have left." Her touch was warm and sure, the first human contact beyond handshakes that Virgil had experienced in years. Something shifted in his chest, a creaking open of a door long shut. "Is that what you've done?" he asked softly. "Not let regrets consume you. I've tried," she answered honestly. "Some days I succeed better than others. Opening this boarding house was Jacob's dream. Continuing it has been mine. It gives purpose to my days. You've built something fine here, as you're building a new life as deputy." She withdrew her hand, and Virgil felt the absence like a physical thing. "We go on because what else is there to do?" "Indeed." Virgil finished the last of his stew. "Thank you for waiting up and for the meal." "You're welcome, Virgil. Good night." As he climbed the stairs to his room, Virgil realized he felt lighter somehow, as if some of the burden he'd carried for so long had been set down, if only temporarily, in Hannah's kitchen. The predicted storm arrived with a vengeance the next day, blanketing Silvercliff in nearly 2 feet of snow overnight. The town hunkered down, with only the hardiest souls venturing out into the swirling white. Virgil spent the day helping to clear paths to essential businesses, and checking on the elderly residents Sheriff Miller was concerned about. By the time he returned to the boarding house that evening, exhausted and chilled to the bone, he found the other boarders gathered in the parlor around a roaring fire, sipping hot cider Hannah had prepared. Dr. Walsh was recounting a humorous tale about delivering a baby during a similar storm the previous winter, while Cooper and Potter engaged in a chess match nearby. "Ah, our intrepid deputy returns," Abernathy called as Virgil stamped snow from his boots in the entryway. "Come warm yourself, man. You look half frozen." Hannah appeared from the kitchen, a steaming mug in her hands. "Here," she said, pressing it into Virgil's cold fingers. "Cider with a bit of something extra for medicinal purposes." The warmth of the mug was almost as welcome as the concern in her eyes. Virgil took a sip, feeling the burn of whiskey mixed with the sweet cider. "Much obliged," he said, following her into the parlor. The evening passed pleasantly, with the storm raging outside while the boarders engaged in stories, games, and conversation. Virgil found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. laughing at Potter's outrageous tales of messages he'd transmitted and nodding in agreement with Cooper's observations about the town's need for a proper library. Throughout it all, he was acutely aware of Hannah moving about the room, tending to the fire, refilling mugs, occasionally joining in the conversation with a gentle comment or wry observation. Several times, he caught her glancing his way, a quiet smile playing at the corners of her mouth. As the evening grew late and the boarders began to retire to their rooms, Virgil lingered, offering to help bank the fire. Hannah accepted, and soon they were alone in the parlor, the room now lit only by the dying embers and a single lamp. "You've made quite an impression on the town in your short time here," Hannah remarked as Virgil carefully arranged the fireplace screen. "Mr. Finch was telling me yesterday how you helped his daughter when her wagon lost a wheel on Front Street." Virgil shrugged. "Anyone would have done the same, perhaps, but not everyone would have then spent their lunch hour helping Mr. Franklin repair the wheel properly so it wouldn't happen again, just being neighborly." Hannah's smile deepened. "And that's precisely why you've made an impression. Silvercliff has had its share of deputies who were quick with a gun but slow with kindness." She lowered her voice. "Between us, Sheriff Miller says you're the best hire he's made in years." A warmth that had nothing to do with the fire or the spiked cider spread through Virgil's chest. It had been a long time since anyone had expressed approval of him, since he'd felt he was doing something worthwhile. "Sheriff's a good man to work for," Virgil said. "Town's lucky to have him, as it's lucky to have you." Hannah gathered a few empty mugs onto a tray. "Will you be able to make it back to check on those families tomorrow if the storm continues?" "Planning on it. The Wilsons are nearly out of firewood, and Mrs. Perkins needs her heart medicine from the doctor. Then you'll need a proper breakfast before you go." Hannah picked up the tray. "I'll make flapjacks. You don't need to go to any special trouble." "It's no trouble, Virgil." She paused at the parlor door, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. "Some people are worth a little extra effort." With that, she was gone, leaving Virgil standing by the dying fire with a curious feeling that something significant had just occurred, though he couldn't have named it if asked. The storm continued for 3 days, during which time Silvercliff settled into the rhythm of a town under siege by the elements. Virgil spent his days helping where needed, from shoveling paths to delivering supplies to checking on those living alone. Each evening he returned to the boarding house, where Hannah waited with hot food and quiet conversation after the other boarders had retired. These late-night talks in the kitchen became a private ritual, a space where both Virgil and Hannah gradually revealed more of themselves. He told her about his dreams for the ranch that would never be realized now. She shared her regret at never having children with Jacob. They discovered shared tastes in literature, a common love of sunrise over mountains, and the same dry humor that could find amusement in life's absurdities. By the time the storm broke and the sun returned to a transformed, snow-covered landscape, something had shifted between them an understanding, a connection that neither acknowledged directly but both felt acutely. Winter settled in earnest over Silvercliff as November gave way to December. The town prepared for Christmas, with merchants decorating their windows and the church organizing a pageant. Even the saloons hung garlands and mistletoe, though their clientele was more interested in the special holiday liquors being served. Virgil found himself unexpectedly involved in the community's celebrations. Sheriff Miller volunteered them both to help construct the town's Christmas tree in the square, a massive pine hauled down from the mountains. Hannah was appointed to the committee organizing a town feast on Christmas Eve, and Virgil often found himself conscripted to move tables, hang decorations, or deliver invitations during his rounds. "Never seen a man look so terrified of ribbon," Hannah teased one evening in mid-December as Virgil returned from helping decorate the church hall, bits of red and green still clinging to his shirt. "Give me an angry drunk any day over Mrs. Peterson with her decoration box," Virgil replied with a mock shudder. "That woman knows exactly how each strand should hang, and heaven help the man who gets it wrong." Hannah laughed, a sound Virgil had come to treasure for its rarity and genuine warmth. She was the same way when we decorated for the Founders' Day dance in July. Poor Mr. Cooper nearly had a conniption trying to meet her standards. They were in the kitchen, Virgil having arrived back at the boarding house after most of the other boarders had retired. Hannah was preparing bread dough for the next morning, her sleeves rolled up, flour dusting her forearms. The domesticity of the scene struck Virgil with unexpected force. The warm kitchen, Hannah's capable hands working the dough, the comfortable conversation between them. It felt like something he'd lost long ago and never expected to find again. "Will you attend the Christmas Eve feast?" Hannah asked, interrupting his thoughts. "Haven't given it much thought," Virgil admitted. "Sheriff will need someone to keep an eye on things." "Surely you could both attend in shifts. Everyone should have some Christmas celebration." Virgil watched her hands kneading the dough, mesmerized by their steady, rhythmic motion. "What about you? I imagine the committee expects its chairwoman to attend." A shadow passed over Hannah's face. "I'll make an appearance, help serve the meal, but I don't generally linger at festivities." She gave the dough a particularly vigorous punch. Holidays can be difficult when you're alone in a crowd. The quiet admission hung in the air between them. Virgil understood precisely what she meant: the peculiar loneliness of watching others celebrate while carrying an empty space inside that no amount of good cheer could fill. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we could attend together. Neither of us alone in the crowd that way." Hannah's hands stilled in the dough. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Are you asking to escort me to the Christmas Eve feast, Deputy Hawthorne?" There was a vulnerability in her question that made Virgil's heart constrict. "I believe I am, Mrs. Landon, if you do me the honor." For a moment he thought she might refuse, then a slow smile spread across her face, transforming her features with a light he'd not seen before. "I would like that very much, Virgil." Then it's settled. He felt absurdly pleased, like a boy who'd successfully asked for his first dance. Hannah returned to her bread dough, but something had changed in the atmosphere between them. A possibility had opened, acknowledged by both. As Christmas approached, Silvercliff experienced a spate of petty thefts that kept Virgil and Sheriff Miller busy. Nothing of great value was taken: food from larders, clothing from washing lines, small items from shop counters when proprietors were distracted. "It's the same every year," Miller explained as they made their rounds. "Weather gets cold, work at the mines slows down, and some folks get desperate. Usually it's newcomers who haven't prepared for winter or saved enough from their summer earnings." "Stealing's still stealing," Virgil observed. "True enough. But I've found it better to catch them, give them a night in jail to think about it, and then offer work clearing snow or chopping wood to pay for what they took, rather than throwing the book at them. Most are good men down on their luck, not hardened criminals." Virgil admired the sheriff's pragmatic compassion. It spoke to the kind of community Silvercliff aspired to be, despite the rough elements that naturally congregated around mining operations. Their investigations led them to a small, dilapidated cabin on the outskirts of town, where three young men barely more than boys had taken up residence after arriving too late in the season to secure steady mine work. Their meager possessions and hollow-cheeked appearance told a story of desperation even before they confessed to the thefts. Rather than arresting them, Sheriff Miller proposed a solution. The town needed extra hands to prepare for the Christmas celebrations. If the young men would work honestly for the next week, they would earn enough to pay for what they'd stolen and secure lodging and meals through the winter. "Sheriff's giving you a chance most lawmen wouldn't," Virgil told the youngest of the three, a freckle-faced boy who couldn't have been more than 19. "Don't waste it." "No, sir," the boy replied earnestly. "We ain't bad men, just hungry and cold. We'll work hard, I promise." As they rode back to town, Miller gave Virgil a sidelong glance. "You handled that well. Not every deputy would have gone along with my approach." Virgil shrugged. "Makes sense to me. Man steals because he's desperate, not because he's evil. Give him honest work and he can keep his dignity while making things right." Miller nodded approvingly. "You're settling in well here, Hawthorne. Town's taken a shine to you." "Feelings mutual," Virgil admitted. "Never expected to find a place again after losing the ranch. Life has a way of surprising us." Miller adjusted his hat against the winter sun. Speaking of which, heard from Mrs. Peterson that you're escorting Hannah Landon to the Christmas feast. Virgil felt his neck warm despite the cold. News travels fast. Small town, Miller chuckled. For what it's worth, I think it's a fine idea. Hannah's kept to herself too long since Jacob passed. Good woman like that shouldn't spend every Christmas serving others and then going home alone. She's a remarkable woman, Virgil said, surprised by the depth of feeling in his own voice. Miller gave him a knowing look. That she is, and if you've got sense enough to see it, you're a smarter man than most. The day before Christmas Eve brought a fresh dusting of snow and a flurry of final preparations for the town feast. The church hall was transformed with evergreen boughs, candles, and ribbons. Tables were arranged in long rows, and the town's women coordinated their cooking efforts, each family contributing what they could to the communal meal. Virgil spent the morning making his usual rounds, then helped transport the last of the decorations and supplies to the hall. As he was carrying in a crate of candles, he spotted Hannah directing the placement of centerpieces, her auburn hair escaping from its practical bun as she gesticulated to make her point clear. She looked up and caught his eye, her serious expression melting into a warm smile that made his step falter momentarily. Virgil realized with a jolt that he hadn't felt this way, this anticipation, this awareness of another person since Sarah. The thought should have filled him with guilt, but instead he felt a quiet certainty that Sarah, who had always wanted his happiness above all, would approve. Just put those with the others, deputy, Mrs. Peterson instructed, breaking the moment. And then we need a strong back to move that table 2 feet to the left. Mrs. Landon insists it's blocking the path to the kitchen. Virgil complied, catching Hannah's eye again as he moved the heavy oak table. She mouthed a silent thank you with a conspiratorial smile that suggested she was well aware of Mrs. Peterson's commanding manner. Later, as the afternoon waned and most of the preparations were complete, Virgil found Hannah in the church kitchen, reviewing lists with several other women. Mrs. Landon, he said formally, aware of the curious glances from the others, may I escort you home? It's getting dark and there's fresh snow. Hannah looked up, a faint blush coloring her cheeks at the public address. That would be most appreciated, Deputy Hawthorne. I'm just finishing here. The other women exchanged knowing looks that Virgil pretended not to notice. Within minutes, Hannah had donned her coat and bonnet, and they stepped out into the crisp winter twilight. You've caused quite a stir, you know, she said as they walked, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. I have, offering to escort the widow Landon home in front of half the town's gossips. There was amusement in her voice rather than censure. Should I not have? Hannah glanced up at him, her expression softening. I didn't say that. It's just that I've been the subject of concerned matchmaking attempts since about 6 months after Jacob died. Every eligible man from here to Denver has been paraded past my doorstep by well-meaning friends. I've become quite adept at politely discouraging interest. Virgil felt a twinge of uncertainty. Am I to be politely discouraged then? They had reached the boarding house, but instead of going in, Hannah paused on the porch, turning to face him in the gathering darkness. No, Virgil, she said quietly. You are not to be discouraged. Before he could respond, she continued. I never expected to feel this way again. After Jacob died, I resigned myself to a life of independence. I've built a good life here, a respectable business. I don't need a man to complete it. I understand that, Virgil said carefully. But the curious thing is, Hannah went on, her eyes holding his steadily, while I don't need anyone to complete my life, I find that I want your company in it. You don't seek to replace what I've lost or change what I've built. You simply offer to walk beside me. She took a small breath. That's a rare quality in a man. Virgil felt something long dormant within him stirring to life, hope, perhaps, or the recognition of a second chance he'd never thought to find. I lost everything that mattered, he said softly. My son, my wife, my land. Came here with nothing but a horse and a rifle, expecting nothing more than work to occupy my days until they ran out. Wasn't looking to start again, to feel anything again. He reached out tentatively, taking her gloved hand in his. But then there was you, Hannah. Your strength, your grace. The way you've built something meaningful from your own loss. Hannah's fingers tightened around his. We're quite the pair, aren't we? both thinking our hearts were finished, only to find them stubbornly continuing on. "Tomorrow," Virgil said, "when I come to escort you to the feast, it won't be as your boarder or the town deputy. If you'll allow it, I'd like it to be as a man calling on a woman he greatly admires, a man who's beginning to hope again." The smile that illuminated Hannah's face seemed to chase away the winter darkness. "I would like that very much, Virgil Hawthorne." For a moment, they stood there in the glow of the porch lamp, snow falling gently around them, two people who had known profound loss finding something unexpected in each other's eyes, a promise, a possibility, a future neither had dared envision. Then, with a gentle squeeze of his hand, Hannah turned and entered the boarding house, leaving Virgil standing in the snow with a lightness in his heart he had thought forever lost. Christmas Eve dawned bright and cold, the sun glittering off fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Silvercliff was transformed into a picture-perfect vision of holiday cheer, with smoke curling from chimneys and evergreen wreaths adorning nearly every door. Virgil rose early, completed his morning rounds with Sheriff Miller, and then returned to his room at the boarding house to prepare for the evening. He had purchased a new shirt for the occasion, stark white against his best black vest, and had even visited the barber for a proper shave and haircut. As he dressed, Virgil caught sight of himself in the small mirror and barely recognized the man looking back at him. Gone was the hollow-eyed drifter who had ridden into town months ago. In his place stood a man with purpose in his stance and something like contentment in his expression. His hair and beard were neatly trimmed, the lines of his face no longer etched with grief alone. At precisely 5 o'clock, Virgil descended the stairs to the foyer, where he had arranged to meet Hannah before the feast. The other boarders had already departed, leaving the house unusually quiet. He waited, hat in hand, heart beating with an anticipation he'd nearly forgotten how to feel. When Hannah appeared at the top of the stairs, Virgil felt the breath leave his body. She wore a dress of deep green velvet, modest yet elegantly tailored to her figure. Her auburn hair was arranged in soft curls framing her face, adorned with a simple pearl comb. Around her neck hung the locket that contained Jacob's memory, but tonight it seemed less a symbol of what she had lost and more a testament to her capacity to honor the past while embracing the present. "You look beautiful," Virgil said simply as she descended, Hannah's cheeks colored slightly at the compliment. "And you are quite handsome, deputy. I hardly recognized you without trail dust on your collar." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" The walk to the church hall was magical, with lanterns illuminating the snow-covered streets and the sounds of carols drifting through the air as they approached. Inside, the hall was transformed by candlelight and greenery, tables laden with food, the town's residents dressed in their finest, children darting excitedly between adults. Their entrance together caused a momentary lull in conversation, followed by welcoming smiles and knowing glances. Sheriff Miller, standing near the punch bowl, raised his cup in silent approval. Mrs. Peterson bustled over immediately. "Hannah, Deputy Hawthorne, you're just in time. We're about to begin serving. Hannah, we've saved places for you both at the head table, but first the Reverend will say grace." The evening unfolded in a warm blur of good food, better company, and the particular joy that comes from a community celebrating together. Hannah, as one of the event's organizers, was frequently called away to attend to various matters, but she always returned to Virgil's side, each time with a smile that seemed meant only for him. After the meal, while the tables were being cleared for dancing, Virgil and Hannah stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant above the snow-covered mountains surrounding the town. "Happy?" Virgil asked, watching her profile as she gazed upward. "Yes," Hannah replied thoughtfully. "For the first time in a very long while, it feels almost disloyal somehow." To Jacob, she nodded. "Part of me will always love him, always miss what we had. As it should be." Virgil's voice was gentle. "Love doesn't end because a life does. But I've come to think that maybe our hearts are larger than we know. Large enough to hold what was precious while making room for something new." Hannah turned to him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "When did a taciturn cowboy become so wise about matters of the heart, not wisdom?" just hard-won experience." He took her hand in his. "I'll never forget Sarah or James, they're part of me, but standing here with you now, I feel something I thought had died with them: possibility, hope for tomorrow." "Possibility," Hannah repeated softly. "Yes, that's it exactly." She stepped closer, her face upturned to his. "I never expected you, Virgil Hawthorne. Never imagined that a trail-worn deputy would walk into my boarding house and slowly, carefully, find his way into my carefully guarded heart." Virgil raised his free hand to her cheek, his touch reverent. "I never expected you either, Hannah Landon. Rode into Silvercliff with nothing, thinking that was all I deserved. You showed me I was wrong." "You're still worth keeping, Virgil," she whispered. "Despite all you've lost, despite all the scars. You're still worth every bit of love this heart has left to give." Her words unlocked something final in him, a last resistance he hadn't known he still maintained. With infinite gentleness, Virgil lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that held both acknowledgement of their shared pain and celebration of their unexpected joy. When they parted, both slightly breathless, the sounds of music began drifting from the hall, a fiddle and piano playing a waltz. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Landon?" Virgil asked, a smile warming his voice. "You may indeed, Deputy Hawthorne," Hannah replied, her eyes alight with happiness. Hand in hand, they returned to the hall, stepping onto the makeshift dance floor where other couples already swirled. As Virgil drew Hannah into his arms, her hand in his, her other resting lightly on his shoulder, he felt a certainty settle over him like a blessing. They moved together in perfect harmony, two souls who had weathered life's harshest storms finding shelter in each other's arms. Around them, the town of Silvercliff celebrated Christmas, but for Virgil and Hannah, it was the celebration of something even more miraculous: a second chance at love, unexpected, and all the more precious for having come after they had both believed such things were no longer possible. As the music played and candles glowed and snow fell gently outside the windows, Virgil held Hannah close and knew with absolute clarity that while he had indeed lost everything he had once loved, life had somehow seen fit to offer him a new beginning, a fresh chapter in a story he had thought concluded. "Merry Christmas, Hannah," he murmured against her hair. "Merry Christmas, Virgil," she answered, her voice filled with promise. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of community and wrapped in the arms of a woman who had helped him rediscover his own worth, Virgil Hawthorne was, at last, home. Spring came to Silvercliff with its usual suddenness, the harsh grip of winter releasing almost overnight as warm Chinook winds swept down from the mountains. The snowdrifts that had defined the town's boundaries for months melted into rushing streams, and the first hardy wildflowers began to appear on south-facing slopes. For Virgil, the changing of the seasons marked nearly 6 months since his arrival in Silvercliff, 6 months of building a new life from the ashes of the old. His position as deputy had become more than just a job. It was a calling that suited his steady nature and sense of justice. The townsfolk had accepted him as one of their own, coming to him with their troubles and trusting his judgment. But the true transformation in Virgil's life was the relationship that had blossomed between him and Hannah since that Christmas Eve. What had begun cautiously, with two wounded souls recognizing something familiar in each other, had grown into a deep and abiding love neither had expected to find again. They had proceeded with care and propriety, mindful of Hannah's position as a respected widow and businesswoman. Their courtship played out in evening walks after supper, Sunday afternoon rides into the countryside when weather permitted, and quiet conversations by the fire long after the other boarders had retired. To accommodate appearances, Virgil had officially moved his residence to a small apartment above the jail in February, though he still took his meals at the boarding house and spent most of his free time there. The arrangement satisfied the town's sense of decorum while allowing them to deepen their connection away from constant scrutiny. On a particularly fine April morning, with the snow gone except for patches in the deepest shade and birds returning to fill the air with song, Virgil sat at his desk in the sheriff's office, completing paperwork. Sheriff Miller had ridden out to investigate reports of rustling at one of the outlying ranches, leaving Virgil to mind the town. The door opened, admitting a shaft of spring sunshine and the familiar figure of Hannah, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "I thought you might appreciate some lunch," she said, setting the basket on his desk. "Fresh bread, roast beef, and apple pie. You're spoiling me," Virgil replied with a smile, rising to help her unpack the basket. "Perhaps. But you've been working long hours this week with the influx of new miners coming in." She laid out the food on the desk. "Besides, I had an ulterior motive for visiting." "Oh," Hannah's expression grew more serious. "I received a letter this morning from Chicago." She took a folded paper from her pocket. "It's from my brother, Thomas. Our father has passed away." Virgil set down the plate he was holding and moved around the desk to her side. "Hannah, I'm sorry, were you close to him?" she sighed, smoothing the letter with her fingertips. "Not for many years. He never forgave me for marrying Jacob against his wishes. When we lost everything in the fire and decided to come west, he said I'd made my bed and must lie in it." A sad smile touched her lips. "He was a proud man, my father, successful in business, respected in society. Having a daughter run off with a carpenter, then move to a mining town in Colorado Territory was more than his pride could bear." "And now?" Virgil asked gently. "Now Thomas writes that father left everything equally divided between us, despite their expectations that I would be disinherited. It seems he regretted our estrangement in his final years." Hannah looked up at Virgil, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "It's a substantial inheritance, Virgil, enough to expand the boarding house or," she hesitated, or to start something new. "Thomas has offered to buy out my share of father's businesses if I prefer a cash settlement. He and his wife are established in Chicago and have no plans to leave." She took a deep breath. "It makes me wonder about possibilities I hadn't considered before." Virgil took her hands in his. "What possibilities are you considering, Hannah?" "That depends entirely on you, Virgil Hawthorne." Her gaze was steady now, the initial emotion replaced by determination. "I'm a practical woman. I've built a good life here, one that sustains me both financially and emotionally. But this inheritance offers freedom I haven't had since, before Jacob died, freedom to choose a path, rather than simply follow the one circumstances dictated." Virgil felt his heart quicken. "And what path are you considering?" "One we would walk together, if you're willing." Hannah's voice was soft but sure. "I love you, Virgil. I think you know that, though neither of us has said the words plainly until now. These past months have shown me that life can offer second chances when we least expect them. I love you too, Hannah." The words came easily, naturally, as if he'd been waiting to say them his whole life. "Have for longer than I probably realized." She smiled at that, squeezing his hands. "Then I'll speak plainly. I don't wish to replace the boarding house with another business that would consume my days and limit our time together. I've spent 3 years serving travelers and temporary residents. I'm ready now to build something that's truly ours. What did you have in mind?" Virgil asked, though something in her expression told him he already knew. "Land," Hannah said simply. "Not a grand ranch like you lost, perhaps, but good grazing land with a sturdy house and room to grow. Something we could build together, combining your knowledge of cattle with my head for business." She paused, suddenly vulnerable. "Unless you found your calling as a lawman and wish to continue," Virgil considered the question honestly. He had found satisfaction in his work as deputy, in being part of the community in a meaningful way. But deep in his heart, he knew the land called to him still the open spaces, the rhythm of seasons, the honest work of building something lasting. "I've been grateful for the badge," he said finally. "It gave me purpose when I had none. But I was born to work the land, Hannah. It's in my blood." The relief in her smile was immediate. "Then we're of one mind. I've already spoken with Mr. Finch at the bank. There's a property about 10 miles south of town, the old Whitaker place. 160 acres with good water rights, a modest house that needs some work but is sound at its core, and several outbuildings. The Whitakers are returning east due to Mrs. Whitaker's health and are anxious to sell." Virgil couldn't help but laugh. "You've thought this through." "I'm a planner by nature," Hannah admitted with a small smile. "But I would never presume to make such a decision without you. It would be our home, our future. The choice must be ours together." Virgil raised her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Hannah Landon, are you proposing to me? A blush colored her cheeks, but her gaze remained steady. I suppose I am, in my practical way. Is that terribly forward of me? No, he said softly. It's perfectly you, and that's what I love. He released her hands only to reach into his vest pocket, withdrawing a small leather pouch. Though you've rather stolen my thunder. Hannah's eyes widened as he opened the pouch and tipped a simple gold ring with a small pearl into his palm. Virgil. Bought it last month when I rode to Denver with that prisoner transfer. Been carrying it since, waiting for the right moment. He looked somewhat abashed. Meant to do this properly, with flowers and perhaps a picnic by the creek once the weather was fine enough. Tears welled in Hannah's eyes, but her smile was radiant. This is perfect. Here now, just us. Virgil took her left hand, his own surprisingly steady as he held the ring poised at her finger. Hannah Landon, you found me when I was broken beyond what I thought could be mended. You saw worth in me when I saw none in myself. You've given me back hope, joy, a future I can believe in. His voice thickened with emotion. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Yes, Hannah whispered, tears now spilling freely down her cheeks. Yes, with all my heart. Virgil slid the ring onto her finger, where it settled as if it had always belonged there. Then he drew her into his arms, sealing their commitment with a kiss that promised all the tomorrows neither had dared hope for after such devastating loss. When they finally parted, Hannah rested her forehead against his chest, her arms around his waist. I never expected this, she murmured. After Jacob died, I thought that chapter of my life was closed forever. As did I after Sarah. Virgil stroked her hair gently. Seems life had other plans for us both. Hannah looked up at him, her eyes bright with happiness and determination. So, shall we go see the Whittaker place this weekend? If it suits us, we could begin making arrangements. I'll need to find a buyer for the boarding house, and you'll need to speak with Sheriff Miller about your position. Virgil chuckled at her immediate return to practical matters. Yes to all of that, and we should discuss when we want to be married. I won't rush you, but I admit I'm eager to begin our life together properly. June, Hannah said decisively. The wildflowers will be at their peak, the weather reliable. That gives us time to settle all our affairs in town and prepare the new place. We could be moved in before summer's end, well established before winter returns. June it is. Virgil kissed her again, marveling at how completely his life had transformed in the space of 6 months. From a man with nothing but a horse and a rifle to a man with a future, a purpose, and most miraculous of all, a woman who loved him despite, or perhaps because of all the broken places they both carried. The news of their engagement spread through Silvercliff with the speed of a prairie fire. By supper time, it seemed the entire town knew. The boarders offered hearty congratulations at the evening meal, Mr. Cooper proposing a toast that brought color to Hannah's cheeks and a rare, full smile to Virgil's face. Sheriff Miller was unsurprised when Virgil spoke to him the next day, offering to stay on as deputy until a replacement could be found and trained. Figured this was coming, Miller said with a knowing smile. Way you two look at each other, it was just a matter of time. And truth be told, I've seen how you watch the horizon sometimes when we're on patrol. Man like you belongs on the land, not behind a badge. I appreciate the understanding, Virgil said, relief evident in his voice. Oh, I understand, all right. Just promise me one thing: you'll bring Hannah into town regular for social gatherings. That woman's apple pie is legendary, and I don't aim to be deprived of it just because you've swept her off to some ranch. Virgil laughed. I think that can be arranged. The following Sunday, Virgil and Hannah rode out to the Whittaker property after church. The journey took them south of Silvercliff, following a well-maintained wagon road that paralleled a creek swollen with spring runoff. As they crested a small rise, the property spread before them rolling grassland interspersed with stands of aspen and pine. A modest white farmhouse set against the backdrop of the mountains. Several outbuildings including a barn, stable, and what appeared to be a workshop. They dismounted by the split rail fence that marked the property line, tethering their horses to a post. What do you think? Hannah asked, watching Virgil's face as he surveyed the land. He took his time before answering, his experienced eye assessing the quality of the grass, the layout of the structures, the natural features that would influence the success or failure of a ranching operation. "Good land," he said finally. "Well-watered, protected from the worst of the winter winds by that ridge to the north. Grass looks healthy, soil rich. House needs work but has good bones." He turned to her, his expression suddenly vulnerable. "It's not as grand as what I had before or what your inheritance might buy elsewhere." Hannah stepped closer, placing her hand on his arm. "I don't want grand, Virgil. I want a home, our home, something we build together where neither of us lives in the shadow of what came before." His expression softened. "Then I think this could be it. Enough land to run a modest herd, maybe 50 head to start. Could add more as we expand. That workshop would suit your talent for crafting. I've seen those quilts and embroidery pieces you sell to Mrs. Green's shop." Hannah's face lit up at his recognition of her artistic pursuits, something she engaged in quietly alongside running the boarding house. "You think there would be time for such things?" "I think," Virgil said seriously, "that our life together should include not just work, but joy. The things that make your eyes light up like they are now, those matter just as much as how many cattle we run or how much we put by for winter." Hannah slipped her arm through his, leaning into his solid presence. "Then let's go inside. Mr. Finch gave me the key so we could inspect everything thoroughly." They spent the next 2 hours exploring the property, from the sturdy but somewhat neglected house to the well-maintained barn to the far reaches of the pastureland. Virgil assessed what repairs would be needed, what equipment they should purchase, how many hands they might need to hire. Hannah made notes in a small book she'd brought, sketching layouts for gardens and making lists of household items they would require. As the afternoon waned, they found themselves sitting on the front porch steps, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western mountains. The house behind them was empty of furnishings but full of possibility, the land around them dormant from winter but ready to burst into lush growth with the advancing spring. "I can see us here," Hannah said softly, "growing old together, building something that lasts." Virgil put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close against his side. "As can I. It won't always be easy, ranching never is. Weather markets 1,000 things beyond our control." "I know," she replied, "but we've both weathered worse storms than any that might come our way here. Together, I believe we can face whatever arises." "Together," Virgil agreed. "That makes all the difference." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, each lost in thoughts of the future taking shape before them. Finally, as the shadows lengthened, Hannah turned to him with practical determination. "So shall I tell Mr. Finch we'll take it?" Virgil smiled, still marveling at how this woman could move so seamlessly from poetic contemplation to decisive action. "Yes, let's make this our home." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Hannah found a buyer for the boarding house, a widower from Denver with experience in hospitality, who was looking to establish himself in a growing community. Virgil worked with Sheriff Miller to identify and train a suitable replacement, settling on a former Army sergeant named Phillips, who had recently moved to the area with his family. The town responded to news of their plans with a mixture of congratulations and practical assistance. When word spread that they would be married in June and moving to the old Whitaker place, offers of help began pouring in. The miners promised to help with repairs to the house and outbuildings. The women of the church organized a quilting bee to create bedding for their new home. Even the saloon owner contributed, offering barrels of nails and paint he had over-ordered for his own establishment's renovation. By late May, the house was ready for habitation, transformed from a neglected dwelling to a welcoming home through the combined efforts of Virgil, Hannah, and their friends. Fresh paint brightened the exterior, new curtains hung at the windows, the roof had been repaired, and the kitchen updated with a new cookstove that was Hannah's particular pride. Outside, the pastures were ready for cattle, the garden planted with vegetables and flowers, and the workshop outfitted with Hannah's loom and sewing supplies. Virgil had purchased 20 head of cattle to start, with plans to expand the herd once they were established. He had also acquired 2 good working horses and hired a young man named Tyler as their ranch hand. the son of a local farmer who wanted to learn the cattle business. On the first Sunday in June, in the small church where they had first danced together at Christmas, Virgil Hawthorne and Hannah Landon were married in a simple ceremony attended by the entire town. Hannah wore a dress of pale blue silk, ordered from Denver, with lace at the collar that had belonged to her mother. Virgil, looking uncommonly polished in a new suit, waited for her at the altar with an expression of such naked joy that several of the town's more sentimental ladies were reduced to tears before the ceremony even began. Sheriff Miller stood as Virgil's best man, while Mrs. Peterson, who had appointed herself Hannah's closest friend in Silvercliff, served as matron of honor. The church was decorated with wildflowers gathered by the schoolchildren, and the reception afterward, held in the same hall as the Christmas feast where their courtship had truly begun, featured food contributed by nearly every household in town. As they stood receiving congratulations, Hannah's hand tucked securely in the crook of Virgil's arm, Sheriff Miller approached with a package wrapped in brown paper. "Wedding gift from the town council," he explained, presenting it to them with a flourish. "Figured you might have use for it at the new place." Hannah unwrapped the package to reveal a hand-carved wooden sign reading Hawthorne Ranch in elegant lettering, with the date of their wedding burned into the lower corner. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Cooper did the carving. Got quite a talent, that school teacher." Miller looked pleased with their reaction. "Thought you might hang it at the entrance to the property, make it official-like." Virgil extended his hand to the sheriff. "We're grateful, not just for this, but for everything. This town took in 2 broken people and helped make them whole again." "That's what community does," Miller replied, shaking Virgil's hand firmly. "And you'll always be part of this one, no matter that you're living 10 miles out." As the celebration continued around them, Virgil drew Hannah into a quiet corner for a moment of privacy. "Happy, Mrs. Hawthorne?" he asked, still marveling at the reality of being able to call her his wife. "Happier than I ever imagined possible again," Hannah replied, her eyes shining with love and promise. "And you, husband?" "Complete," Virgil said simply, drawing her into his arms for a kiss that spoke of all the years they would share, all the challenges they would face together, all the joy they had found in each other after believing such happiness was forever behind them. As summer bloomed across the Colorado landscape, the newly established Hawthorne Ranch took shape under the careful stewardship of its owners. The cattle thrived on the rich grass, the garden yielded abundant vegetables, and the house became truly a home, filled with the comfortable companionship of 2 people who had found in each other the strength to begin again. Virgil discovered that the skills that had made him an effective deputy, patience, fairness, attention to detail, served him equally well as a rancher. He worked from dawn to dusk most days, repairing fences, tending livestock, preparing for the eventual expansion of their operation. But unlike the driven man he had been before losing everything, this Virgil made time for moments of simple pleasure, watching sunsets from the porch with Hannah's hand in his, reading aloud by lamplight in the evenings, riding into town for Sunday services and social gatherings. Hannah, for her part, transformed the house into a haven while developing her own small business, creating quilts, embroidery, and woven goods that she sold through Mrs. Green's shop in Silvercliff. The workshop Virgil had noted on their first visit became her studio, filled with color and texture, and the creative energy she had never had time to fully explore while running the boarding house. By their first anniversary, with the ranch established and prospering, Hannah shared news that completed their joy. They were expecting a child in the late fall. The announcement was met with Virgil's stunned silence, followed by tears neither of them had expected, and finally a tenderness so profound it seemed to fill every corner of their home. "Are you truly happy about this?" Hannah asked that night as they lay together in the darkness. "I know having children again wasn't something we discussed specifically." Virgil pulled her closer, his hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her abdomen. "I never dared hope for it," he admitted. "After James, I couldn't imagine loving another child, risking that kind of loss again." And now I understand what you told me, that Christmas Eve, that we're still worth keeping, still worth loving, despite everything we've lost. He pressed a kiss to her temple. This child is a gift I never thought to receive. Of course I'm happy, Hannah, terrified but happy beyond words. She relaxed against him. I feel the same. It seems almost impossible at our age after all we've been through, but somehow perfectly right. A new beginning, Virgil murmured. Another one when we'd already been blessed with more than we deserved. In November, as the first snows dusted the mountaintops around their valley, Sarah Grace Hawthorne was born in the front bedroom of the ranch house, with Dr. Walsh in attendance and half the women of Silvercliff waiting anxiously in the parlor. She had Hannah's auburn hair and Virgil's steady gaze, and from her first cry, she held both her parents' hearts completely in her tiny hands. As Virgil held his daughter for the first time, looking down into her perfect face while Hannah watched with exhausted radiance from the bed, he felt the final piece of his healing soul lock into place. The losses that had defined him for so long, his son, his wife, his land, would always be part of him, scars that had shaped the man he had become. But they no longer dominated his story. This was his story now, a man who had lost everything he loved, until a widow with her own deep wounds had looked at him across a boarding house table and seen someone still worth keeping. A man who had found the courage to love again, to build again, to believe in tomorrow again. As he placed their daughter gently in Hannah's arms, Virgil sat on the edge of the bed and wrapped his arm around his wife's shoulders, creating a circle of family none of them had expected to find. "Thank you," he whispered against Hannah's hair, "for everything." Hannah looked up at him, her eyes filled with a joy that matched his own. "We built this together, Virgil. This home, this life, this love, and we'll continue building it day by day for all the days we're granted." Outside, snow began to fall in earnest, blanketing their land in pristine white. But inside the Hawthorne ranch, warmth and life and possibility flourished, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and its endless capacity for renewal, even after the deepest loss. For Virgil Hawthorne, who had ridden into Silvercliff with nothing but a horse and a rifle and the weight of his grief, the future stretched before him now like the limitless Colorado sky, vast, bright, and filled with promise.